Let's talk about a more advanced topic, and that is class and class member visibility. I bring this up a little early on in your programming career because it's going to matter in terms of how you access a class and what you're able to access inside of the class and outside of the class. If you noticed in the first couple videos, I made some comments on, well, this is going to be public and we're not going to set anything on this. And when we learned about methods, I told you before that you should probably just throw public in front right now before we have a discussion on what visibility is. There's a number of different types of visibility: public, private, internal, protected internal. What these are ways for you to specify what is accessible from inside or outside of your class. And right now we're only going to focus on two, and that's public and private. Any item, whether it be a method, a property, a field, or a class, can have a visibility modifier in its definition. So for instance, you see here I have public class dog and public int height. And on the fields, I don't have anything. On the methods, I have public void bark and public void display information. And on the constructor, I have public dog. Again, these are for you to determine what is accessible from inside of the class and what is accessible from outside of the class. If I were to talk about public, what that means is you are opening a method or a property or any other class member up for use outside of the class and inside of the class. Meaning if we are inside of the class, we're able to use the property height. And if we are outside of the class, outside meaning, for instance, we're in the main method, we've declared an instance of the class dog as Buster. Outside of the class means outside of the class definition. Here we are able to use our instance Buster.height, and we can see this without actually being or running code inside of the class. If I were to take one of our methods here and instead of height type in Buster.height, sorry, not Buster.height, but just height, I am able to access the height property from inside of the class definition. In here, we have fields: height, weight, breed, and name. By default, if I try to access these fields on a class instance, such as Buster, Buster.height equals 18, or 7 or 18, sorry. I can't, because again, if you see here, it says dog.height is inaccessible due to its protection level. A protection level is the same term as visibility. By default, the height field is private, meaning we can access the height field from within our class, and by within the class, I literally mean within the code of the class. So here, height, we use this field and it is accessible to us, but outside of the class, meaning any code literally outside the class definition, so up here, it is not accessible to us when it is automatically private. If I were to scroll down to fields and make this public, and we go back up to our main method, I can now access the field outside of the property. So here, height, the property, is accessible, and height, the field, is now accessible. And we can see that this is valid code. We're not getting an error by using it after we change the visibility or protection level of the field height. So you will get errors in your code at some point if you try to use something that is not declared with an explicit protection level. Let's walk through our class again and delete the protection levels and see what happened. Let's go back up to our code, and now let's open up our error list. So here, every time we try to access a part of dog, we see we have a problem. First, dog.dog is inaccessible due to its protection level. Here, we're trying to instantiate a new instance of the dog class and tie it to variable Buster. And we've called the constructor, which again will be a separate video on constructors. We scroll down to our constructor, which is really just another method. And because we haven't specified an explicit protection level, we're throwing an error. By default, this is only accessible from literally within the class code. So if I were to call this in display information or bark, it would be accessible. I would be able to call that method. If I try to call it up here, as in new dog, it does not work because I have not specified the protection level. If you want this method to be accessible outside of the class code, you would use the protection level or visibility of public. So if we go down and we add the public protection level to the constructor, and we scroll back up, we see there is no more error. Go back into our error list. Those errors are gone. The constructor is now accessible. We now have a problem with the properties, height, weight, and name. We're trying to use them here, use their setters. But unfortunately, because we haven't explicitly provided a protection level, we cannot access it because this is outside of the class's definition code. So for height, weight, name, and breed, which you're not using here, we need to specify the protection level. So here for height, weight, breed, and name, we'll specify the protection level as public, meaning it is accessible outside of the class definition code. For now, I will just specify public on height and weight. And we can see now that the errors for height and weight are no longer there. And the only property causing us a problem is the name property. And again, dog.name is inaccessible due to its protection level is the error we see, because now we have two calls to this setter of the property name when name has not explicitly been given a public protection level. So to solve this problem, let's add the public protection level to breed and name. Now, all properties are accessible outside of the class. Let's remove the Ernie instance of the dog class for a second and try to call bark. Remember, when we call bark, it will write woof to the screen. And we're going to call it on the instance of Buster. Buster.bark. Well, there's a problem here. If we try to call bark, and we'll use IntelliSense as an example, so we type in Buster, which is the variable representing the class instance of dog, and we type a period, and we look for the bark method. It's not in the IntelliSense list. If we type it in manually, we get an issue. Dog.bark is inaccessible due to its protection level. Just like properties or fields, methods require a protection level to be specified. So if we want bark to be accessible outside of the class, we'll use the public visibility, or protection level. Now we get no error when we try to call buster.bark. If you want to ensure that a method that is internal to the class is not exposed outside of the class, you can explicitly use the protection level of private. If we type in private, we ensure that the bark method is only accessible from within the class. So for instance, if we try to use it in display information by calling bark, there is no error thrown. However, if we go back up and look at calling bark on the Buster instance of the dog class, we see that an error is thrown that it's inaccessible due to its protection level. If we again change the private protection level to public, the visibility has now changed, and we are able to not only access bark on the Buster instance of the dog class, but we are still able to access it internally in the display information method of the instance of the dog class. For the purposes of this course, public is the way to go. You may get some confusing errors if you don't specify public on your class members, such as methods or properties or fields. If you don't know, put public. For fields, do not specify a protection level and keep them private. That way, you will expose yourself to the good practice of keeping fields private or internal to the class code only, and exposing those fields through public properties. Anytime you write a method or a property, if it's not only supposed to be used inside of the class, specify public. If it's supposed to be used only inside of the class, specify private. And if you don't know, just put public for the purposes of this course.